Welcome to History for Snooze. Every page of history is inked with both silence and thunder, the clash of steel, the roll of drums, and the unspoken courage of those who once stood beneath banners of war. Tonight, our journey drifts into the shadows and echoes of medieval warfare, a world of knights and castles, of sieges beneath moonlit skies, and of strategies whispered in torchlit halls. It was an age where battles shaped kingdoms, yet behind every sword raised was also a quiet heart, longing for peace. We will wander gently through this past, not in haste, not with fear, but with the patience of time itself. We will hear of armor forged by fire, of castles built like stone guardians, and of warriors whose names may be forgotten, but whose footsteps still echo in the soil of Europe and beyond. Before we begin, let the noise of the day slip away. Find your calm, dim the lights, and rest easy. If these stories bring you comfort, I invite you to subscribe. It is your kindness that keeps these tales alive. And tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world you are listening tonight. Your presence makes this journey even richer. Now, breathe slowly, close your eyes, and come with me to the age of knights and kings. For in this quiet retelling, war is not just conflict. It is memory, it is legacy, and it is part of the long road that leads us here, to this moment of peace. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE to the Renaissance in the late 15th century, witnessed some of the most significant developments in military history. This era saw the rise and fall of empires, the emergence of new military technologies, and the evolution of warfare from the organized legions of Rome to the complex feudal armies of the High Middle Ages, and finally to the early modern forces that would dominate the Renaissance battlefield. Medieval warfare was characterized by several key features that distinguished it from both ancient and modern combat. First, the decentralization of military power following the collapse of Rome led to a feudal system where military obligation was tied to land ownership. This created a military hierarchy based on personal loyalty and service rather than professional armies. Second, the period saw significant technological innovation, including the development of heavy cavalry, improved metallurgy, and revolutionary siege engines. Third, the influence of Christianity and later Islam shaped not only the motivation for warfare but also its conduct, leading to concepts of just war and the rise of military religious orders. The geographic scope of medieval warfare extended far beyond Western Europe, encompassing the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic world, the Mongol conquests, and the various kingdoms and empires of Asia and Africa. Each region developed its own military traditions and innovations, often through contact and conflict with neighboring civilizations. The exchange of military knowledge through trade, conquest, and cultural interaction was a constant feature of the medieval period, leading to the rapid spread of new technologies and tactics across vast distances. The social structure of medieval society was intimately connected to its military organization. The feudal system that emerged in Western Europe was essentially a military arrangement, where land was granted in exchange for military service. This created a warrior aristocracy whose primary function was warfare, leading to the development of chivalric ideals and the professionalization of combat. The knight became the dominant military figure of the High Middle Ages, representing not only military prowess but also social status and political power. Economic factors played a crucial role in medieval warfare. The cost of maintaining armies, constructing fortifications, and developing new technologies placed enormous demands on medieval economies. The rise of mercenary companies in the later medieval period reflected both the increasing complexity of warfare and the growing monetization of European economies. The economic disruption caused by warfare, including the destruction of crops and trade routes, had profound effects on medieval society. The period also witnessed significant changes in the scale and organization of warfare. Early medieval conflicts were often small-scale affairs involving relatively small groups of warriors. By the High Middle Ages, armies had grown substantially, with major campaigns involving tens of thousands of combatants. The administrative challenges of organizing, supplying, and commanding such large forces led to important innovations in military organization and logistics. Religious motivation was a defining feature of much medieval warfare. The concept of holy war, whether in the form of Christian crusades or Islamic jihad, provided ideological justification for military campaigns and influenced the conduct of warfare. The military religious orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, represented a unique fusion of religious devotion and military prowess that characterized the medieval period. The legacy of medieval warfare extends far beyond the period itself. Many of the military innovations developed during this era, including improvements in metallurgy, fortification design, and military organization, laid the foundation for early modern warfare. The tactical lessons learned on medieval battlefields continued to influence military thinking well into the gunpowder age. Understanding medieval warfare requires examining not only the famous battles and campaigns but also the broader military culture of the period. This includes the training and equipment of warriors, the development of military architecture, the role of siege warfare, and the evolution of naval combat. The period saw the emergence of military treatises and the codification of military knowledge, marking the beginning of a more systematic approach to the study of warfare. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE marked not the end of Roman military influence, but rather its transformation and adaptation to new political realities. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued many Roman military traditions while adapting to new threats and incorporating new peoples into its military structure. In the West, the successor kingdoms that emerged from the ruins of Rome faced the challenge of maintaining military effectiveness without the extensive administrative apparatus that had supported the Roman legions. The Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under Theodoric the Great, 493 to 526 CE, initially maintained many Roman military practices. Theodoric's army combined Gothic heavy cavalry with Roman infantry tactics and siege techniques. However, the kingdom's military structure was fundamentally different from that of Rome, relying more heavily on personal loyalty and tribal connections than on professional military service. This represented a broader trend across post-Roman Europe, where military organization became increasingly decentralized and personalized. The Frankish kingdom emerged as the most successful of the post-Roman states, largely due to its military innovations and effective leadership. The Franks initially relied heavily on infantry armed with the Francisca, throwing axe and spear, but gradually incorporated cavalry elements influenced by contact with other Germanic tribes and the remaining Roman population. The reign of Clovis I, 481 to 511 c, saw the consolidation of Frankish power through a series of military campaigns that demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms tactics. The rise of heavy cavalry. Perhaps the most significant military development of the early medieval period was the emergence of heavy cavalry as the dominant force on European battlefields. This transformation was gradual and resulted from several technological and social factors. The introduction of the stirrup, probably from Central Asian nomadic peoples, provided cavalry with greater stability and striking power. Archaeological evidence suggests that stirrups appeared in Western Europe during the 7th and 8th centuries, though their adoption was not uniform across all regions. The development of heavy cavalry was closely linked to changes in armor and weapons technology. The evolution from mail to more sophisticated forms of body armor, including the eventual development of plate armor, made cavalry increasingly effective against infantry attacks. The lance, used in conjunction with stirrups, allowed cavalry to deliver devastating charges that could break enemy formations. This tactical revolution had profound social implications, as the cost of maintaining heavy cavalry restricted this form of warfare to the wealthy elite. The Carolingian period, 751 to 987 C, saw the refinement of heavy cavalry tactics and their integration into broader military strategy. Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours, 732 CE, is often cited as a turning point in the development of Western European cavalry, though recent scholarship suggests that the transformation was more gradual and complex than previously believed. The battle itself was primarily fought by infantry, but it demonstrated the importance of disciplined troops and effective leadership in facing mobile cavalry forces. Charlemagne's military campaigns, 768 to 814 C, showcased the effectiveness of combined cavalry and infantry forces. His conquest of the Saxon lands, the subjugation of the Avars, and the establishment of the Spanish March all demonstrated the tactical flexibility of Carolingian armies. The Capitulaire de Villiers and other administrative documents reveal the extensive logistical preparations required for these campaigns, including the organization of supply trains and the coordination of forces from different regions of the empire. Byzantine military continuity and innovation. The Byzantine Empire represented continuity with Roman military traditions while adapting to new challenges and incorporating innovations from various sources. The Strategikon of Emperor Maurice, circa 600 CE, provides detailed insight into Byzantine military organization and tactics during this period. The text reveals a sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare, emphasizing the importance of coordination between different types of troops and the need for flexible tactical responses to various opponents. Byzantine military organization differed significantly from its Western counterparts in its emphasis on professional soldiers and centralized command. The theme system, developed during the 7th and 8th centuries, created military districts where soldier farmers were granted land in exchange for military service. This system provided the empire with a reliable source of troops while maintaining agricultural productivity in frontier regions. The Byzantines were particularly innovative in their use of military engineers and siege technology. Greek fire, an incendiary weapon whose exact composition remains unknown, gave Byzantine naval and siege forces a significant advantage over their opponents. The weapon was first used effectively during the Arab sieges of Constantinople, 674 to 678 and 717 to 718 CE, demonstrating its strategic importance in defending the empire's capital. Byzantine cavalry tactics evolved throughout the early medieval period, incorporating elements from various military traditions. The cataphractoi, heavy cavalry, were supplemented by lighter cavalry units and supported by disciplined infantry formations. The empire's position at the crossroads between Europe and Asia allowed it to observe and adapt military innovations from both directions, making Byzantine forces among the most sophisticated of the early medieval period. The Arab conquests and Islamic warfare. The emergence of Islam in the 7th century and the subsequent Arab conquests represented one of the most dramatic military developments of the early medieval period. Within a century of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Arab armies had conquered vast territories spanning from Spain to Central Asia, defeating both the Byzantine and Sassanid empires and establishing a new military tradition that would influence warfare for centuries. The initial success of Arab armies was due to several factors, including superior mobility, effective leadership, and religious motivation. Arab military organization was based on tribal structures but was unified under the banner of Islam and directed by skilled commanders who understood the importance of rapid movement and concentration of force. The use of mounted archers and light cavalry allowed Arab forces to outmaneuver their opponents and strike at vulnerable points in enemy formations. The conquest of Syria, 634 to 638 CE, demonstrated the effectiveness of Arab military tactics against Byzantine forces. The Battle of Yarmouk, 636 CE, was particularly significant, as it resulted in the complete destruction of a large Byzantine army and opened the way for the conquest of Jerusalem and the rest of the Levant. The battle showcased the importance of mobility and tactical flexibility, as Arab forces used feigned retreats and enveloping movements to defeat a numerically superior enemy. The Arab conquest of Persia, 633 to 654 CE, required different tactical approaches due to the different military traditions of the Sassanid Empire. Persian forces relied heavily on heavy cavalry and had experience fighting nomadic opponents, but they proved unable to cope with the combination of Arab mobility and determination. The Battle of Qadisiyah, 636 CE, marked the decisive defeat of Sassanid forces and opened the way for the conquest of the Persian heartland. Islamic military culture emphasized several principles that distinguished it from contemporary Christian or pagan military traditions. The concept of jihad provided religious motivation for warfare, while Islamic law established rules for the conduct of war that influenced military behavior. The treatment of prisoners, the protection of non-combatants, and the division of booty were all regulated by Islamic law, creating a more systematic approach to warfare than was common in many contemporary societies. The Viking Age and maritime warfare. The Viking Age, 7931-1066 CE, marked a significant development in early medieval warfare, particularly in the realm of maritime military operations. Viking raids and conquests were facilitated by superior shipbuilding technology and navigational skills that allowed Scandinavian warriors to strike targets throughout Europe and beyond. The longship, with its shallow draft and flexible construction, was ideally suited for both ocean voyages and river navigation, giving Vikings unprecedented mobility. Viking military organization was based on the warband, here, a group of professional warriors bound together by oaths of loyalty to a leader. These groups were relatively small, typically numbering in the dozens rather than hundreds, but their mobility and tactical skill made them extremely effective in raids and smaller conflicts. The emphasis on individual combat skill and the warrior ethos created highly motivated forces that could achieve objectives far out of proportion to their numbers. The Great Army, Mysel here, that invaded England in 865 CE represented a new phase in Viking military activity. This force, numbering several thousand warriors, demonstrated the ability of Viking leaders to organize large-scale military operations. The conquest of York, the establishment of the Danelaw, and the long struggle with the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms showed how Viking military methods could be adapted to territorial conquest rather than simply raiding. Viking siege techniques were initially limited, as their military culture emphasized mobility and rapid strikes rather than prolonged operations. However, contact with more advanced siege technologies during their operations in Francia and other regions led to improvements in this area. The Siege of Paris, 885 to 886 CE, demonstrated Viking adaptability, as they constructed siege engines and attempted to breach the city's fortifications through sustained assault. The integration of Viking forces into the military systems of other European powers marked the end of the classical Viking Age but demonstrated the lasting influence of Scandinavian military culture. The Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire, composed primarily of Scandinavian warriors, served as elite troops for several centuries. Similarly, The Norman conquest of England in 1066 CE represented the culmination of Viking military evolution, as the Normans combined Scandinavian warrior traditions with Frankish heavy cavalry tactics. Anglo-Saxon military development. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that emerged in post-Roman Britain developed distinctive military traditions that combined Germanic warrior culture with influences from Celtic, Roman, and later Viking sources. The FWRD, a militia system based on territorial organization, provided the backbone of Anglo-Saxon military forces. This system required all free men to serve in military capacity when called upon, creating a broad base of military service that could be mobilized for defense. The professional warriors of Anglo-Saxon society, known as thanes, formed the core of military forces and were equipped with superior weapons and armor. The Anglo-Saxon warrior culture emphasized personal loyalty, courage in battle, and the importance of maintaining honor even in defeat. These values were celebrated in epic poetry such as Beowulf and the Battle of Maldon, which provide insight into the military ethos of the period. Anglo-Saxon weapons technology evolved significantly throughout the early medieval period. The Sikh's short sword was supplemented by longer swords of increasingly sophisticated manufacture, while spears remained the primary weapon of most warriors. The development of pattern-welded swords demonstrated advanced metallurgical skills, and archaeological evidence suggests that Anglo-Saxon smiths were among the most skilled in early medieval Europe. The Viking invasions of the 9th and 10th centuries forced significant changes in Anglo-Saxon military organization. Alfred the Great's military reforms included the creation of a network of fortified settlements, and the reorganization of the FYRD to ensure that forces were always available for defense. These innovations proved effective in resisting Viking conquest and provided a model for later medieval defensive strategies. The Battle of Hastings, 1066 CE, marked the end of Anglo-Saxon military independence but demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Anglo-Saxon military methods. The disciplined infantry formation of Harold Godwinson's army initially resisted Norman cavalry charges effectively, but the lack of significant cavalry forces ultimately proved decisive. The battle illustrated the changing nature of medieval warfare and the growing importance of heavy cavalry in determining battlefield outcomes. Carolingian military organization. The Carolingian Empire represented the most sophisticated military organization in Western Europe during the early medieval period. The capitularies of Charlemagne and his successors provide detailed information about military obligations, equipment requirements, and organizational structures that reveal a systematic approach to warfare unprecedented since the fall of Rome. The Carolingian military system was based on the concept of vassalage, where individuals received land grants in exchange for military service. This created a hierarchy of military obligation that extended from the emperor down to individual warriors. The system ensured that military forces could be raised when needed while maintaining the agricultural productivity necessary to support military operations. Carolingian armies were notable for their combined arms approach, integrating heavy cavalry, infantry, and specialized units such as engineers and archers. The emphasis on siege warfare reflected the reality of Carolingian military campaigns, which often involved the reduction of fortified positions. The development of siege trains and the systematic approach to fortification demonstrates the sophisticated nature of Carolingian military thinking. The administrative aspects of Carolingian warfare were equally impressive. The organization of supply trains, the coordination of forces from different regions, and the establishment of defensive positions all required extensive planning and coordination. The Capitulaire de Villiers provides insight into the economic preparations for military campaigns, including the stockpiling of weapons and the organization of logistical support. The division of the Carolingian Empire after the death of Charlemagne led to the fragmentation of this military system, but its influence continued throughout the medieval period. The concepts of vassalage and military service in exchange for land grants became fundamental elements of the feudal system that would dominate European warfare for centuries. The High Medieval period witnessed the full flowering of feudalism as both a social system and a military organization. The decentralization of political power that began with the collapse of the Carolingian Empire reached its culmination in the 10th and 11th centuries, creating a military landscape dominated by local strongmen who commanded the loyalty of professional warriors in exchange for land grants and protection. The knight emerged as the central figure of this military system, representing not only military prowess but also social status and political authority. The transformation from early medieval heavy cavalry to the fully developed knight of the High Middle Ages involved both technological and cultural changes. The development of more sophisticated armor, including the gradual transition from mail to plate, provided knights with increased protection while maintaining mobility on the battlefield. The code of chivalry that developed during this period established behavioral norms for the warrior aristocracy that extended beyond mere military conduct. Chivalric ideals emphasized courage, honor, loyalty, and protection of the weak, creating a martial culture that influenced European society for centuries. The literary tradition of chivalric romance, beginning with the Chansons de Geste and evolving through the Arthurian cycle, both reflected and shaped these ideals. The military effectiveness of knightly heavy cavalry was demonstrated repeatedly during the High Medieval period. The Norman conquest of England, 1066, showcased the decisive impact of well-coordinated cavalry charges against infantry formations. The Norman success was due not only to their military techniques but also to their ability to combine cavalry with archers and their tactical flexibility in adapting to battlefield conditions. The evolution of tournament culture during the High Medieval period served both as training for warfare and as a means of demonstrating social status. Early tournaments were essentially mock battles that provided realistic combat training, but they gradually evolved into more ritualized contests that emphasized individual skill and courtly display. The tournament culture of the 12th and 13th centuries created a shared martial culture among the European nobility that transcended political boundaries. The development of military architecture during this period reflected the dominance of heavy cavalry and the importance of controlling strategic points in the landscape. The Motte and Bailey Castle gave way to more sophisticated stone fortifications designed to withstand siege warfare while providing bases for cavalry operations. The integration of military architecture with the feudal system created a defensive network that could effectively resist invasion while controlling local populations. The Crusades, holy war and military innovation. The Crusades, 1095 to 1291, represented one of the most significant military phenomena of the High Medieval period, combining religious motivation with military innovation and cultural exchange. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of Western European military methods when applied to warfare in different geographic and cultural contexts. The military challenges faced by crusading armies were substantial. The journey to the Holy Land required crossing vast distances through potentially hostile territory, while the climate and terrain of the Middle East differed significantly from Western Europe. The need to maintain supply lines over such distances forced innovations in military logistics and organization that would influence European warfare for centuries. The Siege of Antioch, 1097 to 1098, during the First Crusade illustrated both the capabilities and limitations of crusading armies. The 8-month siege demonstrated the determination of the Crusaders but also revealed weaknesses in their siege techniques and logistical organization. The eventual capture of the city through treachery rather than assault highlighted the importance of intelligence and political manipulation in medieval warfare. The establishment of the Crusader states created unique military challenges that required adaptation of Western European military methods to local conditions. The military orders, particularly the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, developed innovative approaches to warfare that combined Western heavy cavalry with Eastern military techniques. These orders maintained professional armies that could respond rapidly to threats and provided continuity of military organization that was often lacking in feudal armies. The military architecture of the Crusader states represented a fusion of Western and Eastern traditions. Castles such as Croix de Chevaliers incorporated Byzantine and Islamic architectural elements while maintaining the military effectiveness required for frontier warfare. The development of concentric fortification systems during this period influenced castle design throughout Europe. The Muslim response to the Crusades, particularly under leaders such as Saladin, demonstrated the adaptability of Islamic military methods. The recapture of Jerusalem in 1187 and the subsequent Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, showed how Islamic forces could effectively counter Western military techniques through superior mobility, better knowledge of local conditions, and more sophisticated siege techniques. The later Crusades reflected changes in both military technology and political organization. The Fourth Crusade's diversion to Constantinople, 1204, demonstrated the growing importance of economic factors in military campaigns and the difficulty of maintaining religious motivation over extended periods. The Crusades ultimately failed in their primary objective but had lasting effects on military development, cultural exchange, and the relationship between Christianity and Islam. The Mongol conquests. Revolutionary warfare. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century represented perhaps the most significant military development of the High Medieval period. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, Mongol armies conquered territory spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, demonstrating military capabilities that surpassed those of all contemporary civilizations. The Mongol military system challenged existing assumptions about warfare and forced adaptations that influenced military development across Eurasia. Mongol military organization was based on the decimal system, with units of 10, Arban, 100, Jaghun, 1000, Mingan, and 10,000, Tumun. This structure provided clear chains of command and enabled rapid communication and coordination across large armies. The system also facilitated the integration of conquered peoples into Mongol military forces, as non-Mongol units could be incorporated into the existing organizational framework. The tactical innovations of Mongol warfare were revolutionary. The emphasis on mobility and archery created highly flexible forces capable of executing complex maneuvers over vast distances. Mongol armies could cover hundreds of miles in weeks while maintaining combat effectiveness, allowing them to achieve strategic surprise and concentrate superior forces at decisive points. The use of feigned retreats, enveloping movements, and coordinated attacks by multiple columns demonstrated tactical sophistication that exceeded that of most contemporary armies. Mongol siege warfare initially relied on Chinese engineers and techniques, but it evolved to incorporate innovations from all conquered territories. The Siege of Baghdad, 1258, demonstrated Mongol ability to reduce even the most formidable fortifications through a combination of engineering skill, psychological warfare, and systematic approach to siege operations. The destruction of the city served as both a military victory and a demonstration of Mongol power that deterred resistance elsewhere. The impact of Mongol conquests on European military development was profound. The invasions of Poland and Hungary, 1241 to 1242, demonstrated the limitations of Western European military methods against Mongol tactics. The defeat of Henry II the Pious at the Battle of Legnica and the destruction of Bela Iv's army at the Battle of Mohi forced European military leaders to reconsider their approaches to cavalry warfare and military organization. The Mongol military system also facilitated cultural and technological exchange on an unprecedented scale. The Pax Mongolica created conditions for the transmission of military innovations across vast distances, accelerating the development and adoption of new weapons and techniques. Chinese siege engines appeared in European warfare, while Islamic administrative methods were adopted in China, demonstrating the cosmopolitan nature of Mongol military organization. The development of infantry tactics. While heavy cavalry dominated high medieval battlefields, the period also witnessed significant developments in infantry warfare. The Swiss pikemen of the 13th century began developing tactics that would eventually challenge cavalry supremacy, while English longbowmen demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of massed archery against even heavily armored opponents. The Battle of Morgarten, 1315, marked a turning point in infantry development, as Swiss forces using long pikes and favorable terrain defeated an Austrian army dominated by heavy cavalry. The battle demonstrated that disciplined infantry armed with appropriate weapons could successfully resist cavalry charges, challenging one of the fundamental assumptions of high medieval warfare. The development of crossbow technology during the High Medieval period provided infantry with increased effectiveness against armored opponents. The crossbow's mechanical advantage allowed relatively untrained soldiers to penetrate armor that could resist conventional archery, while the weapon's ease of use made it possible to equip large numbers of troops effectively. The papal ban on crossbows, Second Lateran Council, 1139, against Christians reflected concerns about the weapon's impact on traditional military hierarchies. The emergence of communal militias in Italian city-states during the High Medieval period demonstrated alternative approaches to military organization. The Lombard League's victory over Frederick Barbarossa at the Battle of Legnano, 1176, showed that citizen soldiers could successfully resist professional armies when properly organized and motivated. The development of communal military institutions provided a model that would influence later developments in military organization. The integration of different infantry types became increasingly important during the High Medieval period. Armies began to coordinate archers, crossbowmen, and spearmen more effectively, creating combined arms formations that could resist cavalry while maintaining offensive capability. The development of these tactics required improved training and discipline, leading to the emergence of more professional military organizations. Naval warfare and maritime power. Naval warfare during the High Medieval period was characterized by the development of specialized warships and the growing importance of maritime trade routes. The Mediterranean Sea remained the primary theater of naval operations, but significant developments also occurred in northern European waters and the Indian Ocean. The Byzantine Empire maintained the most sophisticated naval force of the early High Medieval period, building on Roman maritime traditions while incorporating new technologies. The development of Greek fire and the construction of specialized warships, dromon, gave Byzantine naval forces significant advantages over their opponents. The naval victories against Arab fleets during the 7th and 8th centuries demonstrated the continued importance of naval power in controlling strategic waterways. The emergence of the Italian maritime republics, Venice, Genoa, Pisa, and Amalfi, during the High Medieval period created new centers of naval power. These city-states developed merchant fleets that could be converted to military use when necessary, creating flexible naval forces that could respond to both commercial and military needs. The Fourth Crusade demonstrated the political and military power of these maritime states, as Venetian naval forces effectively controlled the direction of the crusading expedition. The development of the cog in northern European waters during the 12th and 13th centuries revolutionized maritime trade and naval warfare in the region. The cog's increased cargo capacity and seaworthiness made it possible to conduct military operations over greater distances while carrying larger numbers of troops and supplies. The adoption of the stern rudder during this period improved ship handling and made possible more complex naval maneuvers. The Crusades stimulated significant developments in naval technology and organization. The transportation of large armies to the Holy Land required innovations in ship design and fleet organization. The development of specialized troop transports, hussars, and horse transports demonstrated the adaptation of naval technology to specific military requirements. Islamic naval forces also underwent significant development during the High Medieval period. The Ayyubid and later Mamluk fleets successfully contested Christian naval supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, while Islamic forces in Spain and North Africa maintained significant naval capabilities. The development of Islamic naval architecture, influenced by both Mediterranean and Indian Ocean traditions, created distinctive warship designs adapted to specific operational requirements. The High Medieval period witnessed revolutionary developments in military engineering and siege warfare. The construction of increasingly sophisticated fortifications required corresponding advances in siege techniques, creating an ongoing competition between defensive and offensive military engineering. The development of the trebuchet during the 12th and 13th centuries provided siege forces with unprecedented capability against stone fortifications. The counterweight trebuchet could deliver projectiles weighing several hundred pounds with sufficient accuracy to breach walls or destroy defensive structures. The weapon's mechanical principles were sufficiently understood that siege engineers could construct trebuchets on site using local materials. The evolution of castle design during the High Medieval period reflected the changing nature of siege warfare. The transition from single keep designs to concentric fortifications provided multiple lines of defense while creating killing zones where attackers could be subjected to concentrated missile fire. Castles such as Chateau Gallard and Carfilly demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of military architecture that had developed by the end of the period. The development of specialized siege techniques became increasingly important as fortifications grew more sophisticated. Mining operations required skilled engineers capable of calculating the structural effects of undermining walls, while the construction of siege engines demanded craftsmen with advanced knowledge of mechanical principles. The emergence of professional siege engineers marked an important step in the development of military technology. The use of Greek fire and other incendiary weapons during sieges added new dimensions to siege warfare. The ability to set fire to wooden defensive structures or siege engines could dramatically alter the course of a siege, while the psychological impact of incendiary weapons often proved as important as their direct military effects. The development of countermeasures against incendiary weapons became an important aspect of military engineering. The logistical challenges of siege warfare required sophisticated planning and organization. Extended sieges could involve thousands of troops for months or years, requiring enormous quantities of supplies and equipment. The organization of siege trains and the coordination of supply systems represented significant achievements in military administration that influenced broader developments in medieval government. The rise of professional armies. The later High Medieval period witnessed the gradual emergence of more professional military organizations that supplemented or replaced the feudal militia system. Economic development and political centralization created conditions that made possible the maintenance of professional soldiers, while the increasing complexity of warfare required higher levels of training and specialization. The development of mercenary companies during the 13th century reflected both the growing monetization of European economies and the limitations of feudal military service. Companies such as the Brabancans and later the Condottieri of Italy provided professional military services that could supplement feudal forces or serve as alternatives to them. The professional training and experience of mercenary forces often made them more effective than feudal militias, despite concerns about their loyalty and motivation. The military orders represented an alternative model of professional military organization that combined religious motivation with military professionalism. The Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and Teutonic Knights maintained permanent military forces that could respond rapidly to threats while providing continuity of command and training that was often lacking in feudal armies. The financial resources of these orders, derived from extensive land holdings and commercial activities, supported military capabilities that exceeded those of many secular rulers. The emergence of royal guards and household troops marked another development in professional military organization. Rulers such as Philip Augustus of France and Henry II of England maintained permanent military forces that served as both personal protection and the core of larger armies. These professional troops provided reliable military capability while serving as models for broader military reforms. The development of military engineering as a specialized profession during the High Medieval period reflected the growing complexity of warfare. Master engineers such as those employed in the construction of Edward I Welsh castles possessed technical knowledge that required years of training and experience. The emergence of military engineering as a distinct profession marked an important step in the development of professional military services. The integration of different types of professional military forces became increasingly important as armies grew more complex. The coordination of heavy cavalry, infantry, archers, and engineers required command structures and training systems that exceeded the capabilities of traditional feudal organization. The development of more sophisticated military hierarchies and command systems laid the foundation for the professional armies of the later medieval period. The Gunpowder Revolution. The introduction of gunpowder weapons to European warfare during the late medieval period represented one of the most significant military revolutions in history. While gunpowder had been invented in China during the 9th century and was used in Islamic warfare by the 13th century, its systematic adoption in European armies began in earnest during the 14th century and transformed the nature of medieval combat. The earliest European firearms were crude devices that offered little advantage over existing missile weapons. Early hand cannons were difficult to aim, slow to reload, and unreliable in operation. However, the psychological impact of gunpowder weapons often exceeded their immediate military effectiveness. The noise, smoke, and unpredictable nature of early firearms could cause panic among troops and horses unfamiliar with such weapons. The development of artillery during the 14th and 15th centuries had more immediate and dramatic effects on warfare than small arms. Early cannon were primarily siege weapons, capable of battering stone fortifications that had previously been impregnable. The siege of Constantinople in 1453, where Ottoman artillery breached the Theodosian walls that had protected the city for over 1,000 years, dramatically demonstrated the revolutionary potential of gunpowder weapons. The technical challenges of early artillery were substantial. Bronze and iron casting techniques had to be developed to create cannon capable of withstanding the explosive forces generated by gunpowder. The development of corned gunpowder, which burned more consistently and generated greater pressure than early powder mixtures, significantly improved artillery effectiveness. The creation of standardized cannonballs and the development of accurate ranging techniques gradually made artillery more reliable and effective. The tactical implications of gunpowder weapons extended far beyond their immediate destructive effects. The need to protect gunpowder supplies from moisture and enemy action created new logistical challenges, while the specialized knowledge required to operate artillery effectively led to the emergence of professional gunner corps. The integration of firearms with traditional weapon systems required new tactical approaches and training methods. The social implications of gunpowder weapons were equally significant. The effectiveness of firearms in the hands of relatively untrained soldiers challenged the military dominance of the heavily armored knight. A peasant with a few weeks of training could potentially kill a knight who had spent years developing his military skills. This democratization of military effectiveness had profound implications for social and political structures throughout Europe. The 100 Years' War, evolution of medieval tactics. The 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453, between England and France provided an extended laboratory for military innovation and tactical development. The conflict witnessed significant changes in military organization, technology, and tactics that marked the transition from high medieval to early modern warfare. The war's extended duration allowed for the testing and refinement of military innovations across multiple generations of warfare. The English military system during the 100 Years' War represented a significant departure from traditional feudal organization. The use of paid volunteers rather than feudal levies created more professional and reliable forces, while the integration of longbowmen with men-at-arms created effective combined arms formations. The English chevauchée strategy, involving systematic devastation of enemy territory, represented a sophisticated understanding of economic warfare and strategic objectives. The Battle of Crécy, 1346, demonstrated the tactical revolution that English forces had achieved through their combination of dismounted men-at-arms, longbowmen, and defensive tactics. The destruction of the French cavalry through concentrated archery fire showed the limitations of traditional heavy cavalry charges against well-prepared defensive positions. The battle marked a significant shift in tactical thinking that influenced European warfare for centuries. The Siege of Calais, 1346 to 1347, following the Battle of Crécy illustrated the continued importance of siege warfare and the logistical capabilities required for extended military operations. The 11-month siege demonstrated English ability to maintain forces in the field for extended periods while effectively blockading a major fortified city. The eventual surrender of Calais provided England with a crucial foothold on the European continent. French military adaptation during the war demonstrated the ability of medieval military systems to evolve in response to tactical challenges. The reforms implemented by Charles V and his Constable Bertrand du Guesclin emphasized avoiding pitched battles in favor of siege warfare and guerrilla tactics. This strategic approach, known as the Fabian strategy after the Roman general, proved effective in gradually recovering French territory while avoiding the devastating defeats that had characterized earlier phases of the war. The Battle of Poitiers, 1356, further demonstrated English tactical superiority, as the Black Prince's forces again defeated a much larger French army through superior coordination and defensive tactics. However, the French gradually learned to counter English advantages through improved armor, better tactical coordination, and the avoidance of frontal assaults against prepared positions. The development of plate armor during this period provided increased protection against archery while maintaining sufficient mobility for mounted combat. The introduction of gunpowder weapons during the later phases of the 100 Years' War marked a technological turning point. The Siege of Orleans, 1428 to 1429, saw the use of cannon by both sides, though their effectiveness remained limited by technical constraints. Joan of Arc's successful relief of the siege demonstrated the continued importance of leadership and morale in medieval warfare, but also showcased the increasing role of artillery in siege operations. The final phase of the Hundred Years' War, 1415 to 1453, saw continued evolution in military technology and tactics. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415, represented perhaps the pinnacle of English tactical achievement, as Henry V's forces achieved a crushing victory against overwhelming odds through superior positioning, effective use of terrain, and disciplined execution of proven tactics. However, French adaptation and the increasing use of artillery gradually shifted the balance of the conflict. The development of permanent military institutions during the Hundred Years' War had lasting effects on European military organization. The English yeoman warders and the French companies d'ordonnance represented early attempts to create professional military forces that could provide continuity between campaigns. These institutions served as models for later developments in military professionalization throughout Europe. The rise of Swiss infantry and pike tactics. The Swiss Confederacy's military innovations during the late medieval period represented a fundamental challenge to the dominance of heavy cavalry that had characterized European warfare for centuries. Swiss pike tactics, developed through a combination of necessity, terrain advantages, and tactical innovation, proved capable of defeating the finest cavalry forces of the period and influenced military development throughout Europe. The Battle of Morgarten, 1315, marked the beginning of Swiss military reputation, as Confederate forces used terrain advantages and innovative tactics to defeat a much larger Austrian army. The Swiss formation, combining long pikes with crossbows and halberds, created a defensive system that could resist cavalry charges while maintaining offensive capability. The victory demonstrated that determined infantry could successfully challenge aristocratic military dominance. The development of Swiss pike squares during the 14th and 15th centuries created one of the most effective infantry formations in medieval warfare. These massive formations, sometimes numbering several thousand men, presented forests of 18-foot pikes that were virtually impenetrable to cavalry. The discipline required to maintain these formations under combat conditions represented a significant achievement in military training and organization. The Battle of Grandson, 1476, and the Battle of Merton, 1476, against Charles the Bold of Burgundy demonstrated Swiss tactical maturity and the effectiveness of combined arms operations. Swiss forces successfully integrated pike squares with crossbowmen, handgunners, and cavalry to create flexible military formations capable of both defensive and offensive operations. The decisive victories over Burgundian forces established Swiss military reputation throughout Europe. Swiss military organization was based on cantonal militias that combined democratic governance with military effectiveness. Unlike feudal armies or mercenary companies, Swiss forces were citizen soldiers motivated by shared political interests and community loyalty. This military culture created highly motivated forces that could maintain cohesion under extreme combat conditions. The export of Swiss military techniques through mercenary service had profound effects on European warfare. Swiss mercenaries served in virtually every major European army, spreading pike tactics and training methods throughout the continent. The development of the Reichsläufer, Swiss mercenaries, created a military profession that influenced warfare from Italy to the Low Countries. The influence of Swiss tactics extended beyond mere military technique to broader questions of military organization and social structure. The success of citizen soldiers against professional aristocratic armies challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between social status and military effectiveness. The Swiss model influenced the development of popular militias and professional infantry throughout Europe. The Ottoman military revolution. The rise of Ottoman military power during the late medieval period represented one of the most significant developments in the military history of the era. The Ottoman military system combined elements from various military traditions while developing innovative approaches to organization, technology, and tactics that made Ottoman forces among the most effective in the world. The Janissary Corps, established in the 14th century, represented a revolutionary approach to military organization. These slave soldiers, recruited through the devshirme system from Christian populations, received extensive training and formed the elite infantry of the Ottoman army. The Janissaries were among the first European military units to adopt firearms systematically, giving Ottoman forces significant tactical advantages over traditional medieval armies. Ottoman artillery development was particularly advanced, building on earlier Islamic and Byzantine traditions while incorporating innovations from across the empire. The great cannon of Orban, used in the siege of Constantinople, 1453, represented the pinnacle of 15th-century artillery technology. Ottoman foundries produced cannon of unprecedented size and effectiveness, giving Ottoman forces decisive advantages in siege warfare. The Battle of Mohacs, 1526, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of Ottoman combined arms tactics against traditional European military methods. The destruction of the Hungarian army and the death of King Louis II marked the collapse of medieval Hungary and opened the way for Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. The battle showcased the superiority of disciplined infantry armed with firearms over traditional heavy cavalry. Ottoman naval power developed rapidly during the 15th and 16th centuries, challenging Christian naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. The development of galley fleets equipped with artillery created new tactical possibilities for naval warfare. Ottoman naval forces successfully contested Venetian and Genoese naval power while supporting military operations throughout the Mediterranean basin. The administrative sophistication of the Ottoman military system enabled the empire to maintain large armies across vast distances. The Timar system provided military forces while supporting agricultural production, while the devshirme system ensured a steady supply of trained soldiers. The integration of different military traditions within the Ottoman system created flexible forces capable of adapting to various opponents and terrain conditions. The impact of Ottoman military success extended far beyond the battlefield. European military reformers studied Ottoman methods and adopted many of their innovations, particularly in the areas of firearms training and artillery technology. The Ottoman challenge forced European states to modernize their military systems and abandon many traditional medieval military practices. The Wars of the Roses and military innovation in England. The Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, provided a testing ground for military innovations that had been developing throughout the late medieval period. These civil wars saw the systematic application of gunpowder weapons in English warfare and demonstrated the evolution of military tactics and organization that marked the transition to early modern warfare. The Battle of Toten, 1461, represented the largest and bloodiest battle fought on English soil, involving possibly 50,000 combatants. The battle demonstrated the continued effectiveness of traditional medieval weapons and tactics, as longbowmen and dismounted men-at-arms dominated the fighting. However, the scale of the battle and the systematic nature of the slaughter marked a departure from earlier medieval combat. The use of artillery during the Wars of the Roses, while still limited, showed the growing importance of gunpowder weapons in English warfare. The Siege of Bamborough Castle, 1464, saw the first systematic use of artillery against English fortifications, demonstrating the obsolescence of traditional castle design. The effectiveness of cannon against stone walls forced rapid adaptations in defensive architecture throughout England. The Battle of Bosworth Field, 1485, marked the end of the Wars of the Roses and demonstrated several important military developments. The use of handguns by Tudor forces, though limited, showed the gradual adoption of personal firearms in English armies. More importantly, the battle demonstrated the continued importance of political factors in determining military outcomes, as Richard III's defeat resulted more from defections than tactical failure. The military innovations developed during the Wars of the Roses influenced English military development for centuries. The integration of artillery with traditional forces, the development of more professional military organization, and the lessons learned about logistics and strategy all contributed to England's later military success. The wars also demonstrated the devastating social and economic effects of sustained warfare on medieval society. The emergence of military professionals during the Wars of the Roses marked an important development in English military organization. Leaders such as John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, developed professional military skills through extended campaigns and demonstrated the importance of experienced leadership in coordinating complex military operations. These professionals provided continuity and expertise that influenced later military developments. Italian Wars and the Military Revolution. The Italian Wars, 1494 to 1559, marked a decisive transition from medieval to early modern warfare. These conflicts, involving virtually every major European power, served as a laboratory for military innovation and demonstrated the revolutionary changes that were transforming European warfare. The wars saw the systematic application of gunpowder weapons, the development of new fortification systems, and the emergence of professional military organizations that would dominate European warfare for centuries. The French invasion of Italy in 1494 demonstrated the effectiveness of mobile artillery in reducing medieval fortifications. Charles VIII's army was able to capture fortified cities in days or weeks that might previously have resisted for months. The psychological impact of artillery was as important as its physical effects, as defenders often surrendered rather than face bombardment by the new weapons. The Battle of Fornovo, 1495, showed both the potential and limitations of the new military technologies. While French artillery proved effective against fortifications, traditional cavalry charges remained decisive in field battles. The battle demonstrated the complex process by which new military technologies were integrated with existing tactical systems. The development of the Tres Italienne fortification system during the Italian Wars represented a revolutionary response to the challenge of gunpowder artillery. These new fortifications, with their low profile, angular bastions, and designed fields of fire, proved capable of withstanding artillery bombardment while providing effective platforms for defensive artillery. The system represented a complete reconceptualization of military architecture that influenced fortress design worldwide. The emergence of professional military architects during the Italian Wars marked the development of military engineering as a specialized profession. Engineers such as Antonio da Sangallo and Michele Samicilli combined artistic training with practical military experience to create fortification systems of unprecedented sophistication. Their work influenced military architecture throughout Europe and established principles that remained relevant into the modern era. The Battle of Marignano, 1515, demonstrated the tactical revolution that had occurred in European warfare. French forces, combining Swiss pike squares with heavy cavalry and artillery, achieved a decisive victory that showcased the effectiveness of combined arms tactics. The battle marked the emergence of the military system that would dominate European warfare throughout the 16th century. The development of professional armies during the Italian Wars had profound implications for European political development. The cost of maintaining professional forces equipped with the new military technologies placed enormous financial demands on European states, forcing administrative innovations and the development of more sophisticated fiscal systems. The military revolution thus contributed to broader changes in European political and social organization. The Reconquista and military innovation in Iberia. The completion of the Reconquista with the fall of Granada in 1492 marked the end of nearly 8 centuries of warfare between Christian and Muslim forces in Iberia. This prolonged conflict had served as a testing ground for military innovation and cultural exchange that influenced military development throughout Europe and beyond. The military orders that emerged during the Reconquista, particularly the orders of Santiago, Alcantara, and Calatrava, developed distinctive military traditions that combined Christian crusading ideals with practical military effectiveness. These orders maintained professional military forces that could respond rapidly to Muslim raids while providing continuity of command and training that was often lacking in feudal armies. The development of the Jinnite light cavalry during the Reconquista represented an adaptation of Islamic military techniques by Christian forces. These lightly armed horsemen, armed with javelins and trained in rapid maneuver warfare, proved highly effective against both Muslim cavalry and Christian heavy cavalry. The adoption of enemy military techniques demonstrated the practical nature of Iberian military development. The siege warfare techniques developed during the Reconquista influenced military engineering throughout Europe. The systematic approach to reducing Muslim fortifications, combined with innovations in siege artillery, provided Spanish forces with considerable expertise in siege operations. This experience proved valuable in later Spanish military campaigns in Italy and the New World. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, 1212, marked a turning point in the Reconquista and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated Christian military operations. The alliance of Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and foreign crusaders created a combined force that could challenge Muslim military superiority in Iberia. The tactical innovations developed for this campaign influenced Christian military operations throughout the peninsula. The integration of different military traditions within the Christian kingdoms of Iberia created distinctive military cultures that influenced later Spanish military development. The combination of Visigothic, Frankish, and Islamic military traditions, modified by local conditions and extended warfare experience, produced military systems that were uniquely adapted to Iberian conditions. The completion of the Reconquista freed Spanish military resources for expansion beyond Iberia. The military experience gained through centuries of warfare, combined with the latest military technologies, made Spanish forces among the most effective in Europe. This military capability would prove crucial in Spanish expansion into Italy, North Africa, and the New World. The emergence of professional military treatises. The late medieval period witnessed the emergence of systematic military literature that codified tactical knowledge and established military theory as a distinct intellectual discipline. These treatises represented a significant departure from earlier military writing, which had focused primarily on individual combat skills and chivalric ideals rather than systematic analysis of military operations. Christine de Pizan's The Book of Deeds of Arms and of Chivalry, 1410, represented one of the earliest comprehensive military treatises of the late medieval period. Written by one of the first professional female writers in European history, the work combined practical military advice with theoretical discussions of just war and military ethics. The treatise influenced military thinking throughout Europe and established precedents for later military literature. The military treatises of Roberto Valturio, particularly De Re Militari, 1472, demonstrated the application of Renaissance humanist scholarship to military questions. Valturio's work combined classical military theory with contemporary practice, creating a comprehensive analysis of military operations that influenced military education for centuries. The treatise's detailed illustrations of siege engines and fortifications provided practical guidance for military engineers. The emergence of artillery manuals during the late medieval period reflected the growing importance of gunpowder weapons and the specialized knowledge required for their effective use. These technical treatises provided detailed information about cannon construction, gunpowder manufacture, and artillery tactics that was essential for the development of effective artillery forces. The development of military cartography during this period provided commanders with increasingly sophisticated tools for strategic and tactical planning. The creation of detailed maps showing terrain features, fortifications, and supply routes enabled more systematic approaches to military operations. The integration of cartographic knowledge with military planning represented a significant advance in military professionalism. The influence of classical military literature, particularly the works of Vegetius and Frontinus, on late medieval military treatises demonstrated the continuation of ancient military traditions alongside contemporary innovations. Medieval military theorists sought to reconcile classical military wisdom with the realities of contemporary warfare, creating synthetic approaches that influenced military development well into the early modern period. Metallurgy and weapons development. The evolution of metallurgical techniques during the medieval period represented one of the most fundamental drivers of military innovation. The development of improved smelting methods, better understanding of alloy composition, and innovations in metalworking techniques directly impacted the effectiveness of medieval weapons and armor. The transition from iron to steel weapons marked a crucial technological advancement that influenced military effectiveness throughout the period. Early medieval smiths inherited Roman metallurgical knowledge but faced challenges in maintaining consistent quality without the extensive infrastructure that had supported Roman industry. The development of water-powered trip hammers during the 12th century revolutionized metalworking by enabling smiths to work larger pieces of metal with greater precision. This technological advance made possible the production of larger and more sophisticated weapons and armor. The pattern welding technique used in early medieval sword production represented a sophisticated understanding of metallurgy that compensated for limitations in available materials. By combining different types of iron and steel in complex patterns, smiths could create weapons that combined flexibility with hardness. Archaeological analysis of pattern-welded swords reveals metallurgical knowledge that was not surpassed until much later in the medieval period. The development of blast furnaces during the High Medieval period marked a revolutionary advance in iron and steel production. These furnaces, capable of reaching much higher temperatures than earlier bloomery furnaces, enabled the production of cast iron and higher-quality steel. The increased availability of high-quality steel transformed weapon production and made possible the development of more sophisticated armor systems. The emergence of specialized weaponsmithing centers during the medieval period created concentrations of metallurgical expertise that drove continued innovation. Cities such as Milan, Toledo, and Nuremberg became renowned for the quality of their weapons and armor, developing distinctive techniques and styles that influenced military equipment throughout Europe. The guild system that emerged in these centers helped preserve and transmit technical knowledge while encouraging continued innovation. The introduction of water-powered machinery for metalworking during the later medieval period enabled mass production techniques that had been impossible with hand tools alone. Water-powered grindstones, polishing wheels, and drawing machines increased both the quantity and quality of metal products while reducing costs. These technological advances made improved weapons and armor available to broader segments of society. Armor evolution and protection systems. The evolution of medieval armor represented a continuous arms race between offensive and defensive technologies. The development of increasingly sophisticated protection systems was driven by improvements in weapons technology and changes in tactical requirements. The progression from mail to plate armor represented one of the most significant technological achievements of the medieval period. Early medieval mail armor provided flexible protection that was well suited to the mounted warfare that dominated the period. The construction of mail required considerable skill and time, as each ring had to be individually forged and linked to its neighbors. The development of improved mail construction techniques, including the use of alternating solid and riveted rings, increased both the protective value and durability of mail armor. The gradual introduction of plate armor elements during the High Medieval period represented responses to specific tactical challenges. The development of the Great Helm provided improved head protection against the increasing power of medieval weapons, while the addition of knee and elbow protectors, polions and couters, protected vulnerable joint areas. These early plate elements were integrated with mail armor to create hybrid protection systems. The emergence of full plate armor during the late medieval period represented the pinnacle of medieval armor technology. The development of articulated plate systems that provided comprehensive protection while maintaining mobility required sophisticated understanding of both metallurgy and anatomy. Armor makers had to balance protection, weight, and flexibility while creating systems that could be manufactured and maintained in the field. The specialized armor developed for different combat roles demonstrated the sophistication of medieval military technology. Tournament armor was designed to maximize protection in controlled combat situations, while field armor prioritized mobility and versatility. The development of specialized helmets for different combat roles, from the great bassinet to the sallet, showed how armor design responded to specific tactical requirements. The decoration and personalization of medieval armor served both practical and social functions. Heraldic devices and artistic decoration helped identify warriors in combat while demonstrating social status and personal wealth. The development of armor decoration techniques, including etching, gilding, and embossing, created a luxury market that supported continued innovation in armor technology. The decline of plate armor effectiveness in the face of gunpowder weapons marked the end of the medieval armor tradition. However, the metallurgical techniques and manufacturing methods developed during the medieval period provided the foundation for later developments in military technology. The skills developed by medieval armor makers were essential for the production of early firearms and artillery. Siege engine development. The development of siege engines during the medieval period represented some of the most sophisticated mechanical engineering achievements of the era. The evolution from simple catapults to complex trebuchets demonstrated advancing understanding of mechanical principles and the growing importance of siege warfare in medieval military operations. The torsion engines inherited from Roman military engineering continued to be used in the early medieval period, though the knowledge required for their construction and operation gradually declined. The reconstruction of these devices required sophisticated understanding of torsion mechanics and the properties of different materials used for springs and frames. Archaeological evidence suggests that the quality of torsion engines varied considerably depending on the technical knowledge available to their builders. The development of the counterweight trebuchet during the 12th century represented a revolutionary advance in siege engine technology. Unlike torsion engines, which relied on twisted rope or sinew for power, trebuchets used gravitational force to launch projectiles. This mechanical advantage made trebuchets capable of launching much heavier projectiles over greater distances than earlier siege engines. The engineering principles underlying trebuchet construction required sophisticated understanding of leverage, counterweight ratios, and projectile ballistics. Medieval engineers developed empirical knowledge about optimal counterweight ratios and launch angles that enabled them to construct effective siege engines using locally available materials. The ability to build trebuchets on site made them practical for siege operations in remote locations. The variety of projectiles used by medieval siege engines demonstrated both the versatility of these weapons and the creativity of their operators. Stone balls were the most common projectiles, but siege engines also launched incendiary materials, diseased animal carcasses, and even human heads for psychological effect. The development of specialized projectiles for different tactical situations showed the sophisticated understanding of siege warfare that medieval engineers had developed. The defensive measures developed to counter siege engines led to innovations in both fortification design and counter-siege techniques. The development of mantlets and protective screens allowed defenders to operate their own engines while protecting them from enemy fire. The construction of counter-engines and the development of techniques for destroying enemy siege equipment became important elements of defensive strategy. The integration of siege engines with other military technologies created combined arms approaches to siege warfare that were highly sophisticated for their time. The coordination of siege engines with mining operations, infantry assaults, and naval blockades required careful planning and timing. The development of these combined approaches to siege warfare influenced military operations well beyond the medieval period. Fortification architecture and engineering. The evolution of medieval fortification architecture represented a continuous adaptation to changing military technologies and tactical requirements. The development from simple earthwork fortifications to sophisticated stone castles demonstrated advancing engineering capabilities and growing understanding of defensive principles. The medieval period saw revolutionary changes in fortification design that influenced military architecture for centuries. The motte and bailey castle design that emerged in the early medieval period represented an efficient solution to the defensive needs of the feudal system. The artificial mound, motte, provided an elevated position for the keep while the enclosed courtyard, bailey, protected the domestic buildings and garrison. The construction techniques developed for motte and bailey castles could be adapted to various terrain conditions and resource constraints. The transition to stone construction during the High Medieval period enabled the construction of much more sophisticated fortification systems. The development of improved quarrying techniques, better understanding of foundation engineering, and innovations in stone cutting made possible the construction of massive stone walls and towers. The engineering challenges of stone castle construction required specialized knowledge and skills that were developed through extensive experience. The evolution of castle design throughout the medieval period reflected changing tactical requirements and advancing engineering capabilities. The development of concentric fortification systems with multiple rings of walls and towers created defensive systems that could absorb multiple breaches while maintaining overall defensive integrity. The sophisticated design of castles such as Caerphilly and Beaumaris demonstrated the advanced state of medieval military engineering. The integration of passive and active defensive systems in medieval castle design showed sophisticated understanding of defensive principles. The placement of murder holes, the design of gatehouse systems, and the creation of killing zones all demonstrated how medieval engineers could channel and control the movement of attacking forces. The development of these defensive features required detailed understanding of human behavior under combat conditions. The adaptation of medieval fortifications to the challenge of gunpowder artillery marked a revolutionary change in military engineering. The development of lower, thicker walls and the creation of angled bastions represented fundamental changes in fortification philosophy. The transition from vertical to sloped wall designs reflected new understanding of how projectiles interacted with defensive structures. The influence of medieval fortification design extended far beyond its immediate military purpose. The engineering techniques developed for castle construction influenced civilian architecture, bridge building, and other construction projects. The administrative and logistical systems developed to support major fortification projects contributed to broader developments in medieval government and economics. Naval technology and ship design. Medieval naval technology underwent significant evolution that reflected both technological innovation and adaptation to different maritime environments. The development of improved ship designs, navigation techniques, and naval weapons systems enabled the expansion of maritime trade and military operations that characterized the later medieval period. The evolution of ship construction techniques during the medieval period represented advances in both engineering and materials science. The transition from shell-first to frame-first construction methods enabled the building of larger and more robust vessels. The development of improved joining techniques, including the use of iron nails and more sophisticated caulking methods, increased ship durability and seaworthiness. The development of the stern rudder during the 12th century revolutionized ship handling and made possible more sophisticated naval maneuvers. The stern rudder, which replaced the earlier steering or provided much greater control over ship direction and enabled the construction of larger vessels. The adoption of this technology throughout European waters marked a significant advance in naval capabilities. The evolution of sail technology during the medieval period increased both the speed and maneuverability of medieval ships. The development of the lateen sail, borrowed from Islamic naval technology, enabled ships to sail closer to the wind and provided greater tactical flexibility. The combination of different sail types on single vessels created more versatile ships capable of operating in various wind conditions. The specialized warship designs that emerged during the later medieval period reflected growing understanding of naval combat requirements. The development of the galley for Mediterranean warfare, with its combination of oar and sail power, created vessels optimized for naval combat. The emergence of the cog in northern European waters provided a platform suitable for both trade and military operations. The integration of artillery aboard ships during the late medieval period marked the beginning of modern naval warfare. The technical challenges of mounting cannon on ships required innovations in ship design and construction. The development of gun ports and the strengthening of ship structures to handle the weight and recoil of artillery represented significant engineering achievements. The navigation technology developed during the medieval period enabled maritime operations over much greater distances than had been previously possible. The development of the magnetic compass, improvements in chart making, and the creation of navigation instruments such as the astrolabe made possible the oceanic voyages that characterized the end of the medieval period. 6. Fortification and siege warfare. The evolution of castle design. The development of medieval castle design represents one of the most visible and enduring legacies of medieval military engineering. The evolution from simple wooden palisades to sophisticated stone fortresses demonstrates the ongoing arms race between defensive architecture and siege technology that characterized medieval warfare. Each phase of castle development reflected both technological advances and lessons learned from actual combat experience. The earliest medieval fortifications were often simple affairs, consisting of wooden palisades built on natural or artificial elevations. The motte and bailey design that emerged in the 10th and 11th centuries represented a standardized approach that could be rapidly constructed using available materials and labor. The wooden keep built on the artificial mound, motte, provided a final refuge for the garrison, while the enclosed courtyard, bailey, protected domestic buildings and provided space for the local population during attacks. The transition to stone construction during the 11th and 12th centuries marked a revolutionary advance in defensive capability. Stone keeps were far more resistant to fire and assault than their wooden predecessors, while their height and massive construction provided formidable obstacles to attackers. The great keeps of the Norman period, such as those at Rochester and Dover, demonstrate the impressive engineering capabilities of medieval builders and their understanding of defensive principles. The development of curtain wall systems during the 12th and 13th centuries represented a fundamental shift in castle design philosophy. Rather than relying on a single strong point, these systems distributed defensive strength across multiple positions. The curtain wall, reinforced by projecting towers, created a defensive perimeter that could resist multiple simultaneous attacks while providing platforms for defensive weapons. The towers served both as strong points and as bases for flanking fire against attackers approaching the walls. The emergence of concentric castle designs during the 13th century represented the pinnacle of medieval military architecture. These fortifications, with their multiple rings of walls and towers, created defensive systems of unprecedented sophistication. Castles such as Caerphilly in Wales and the Tower of London demonstrate the advanced understanding of defensive principles that medieval engineers had achieved. The concentric design allowed defenders to conduct a fighting withdrawal through successive defensive lines while maintaining the ability to support outer defenses with fire from inner positions. The integration of water defenses into castle design added another layer of protection while serving practical purposes. Moats, whether filled with water or left dry, provided obstacles to undermining operations and siege engines while creating killing zones where attackers could be subjected to concentrated missile fire. The construction of water gates and the integration of castle design with natural water features demonstrated the sophisticated approach that medieval engineers took to defensive planning. The development of specialized defensive features within castle design showed detailed understanding of siege warfare tactics. Murder holes allowed defenders to attack enemies who had penetrated the outer defenses, while machicolations provided protected positions for dropping projectiles on attackers below. The design of gatehouse systems, often the most heavily fortified part of the castle, incorporated multiple defensive features designed to channel and control the movement of attacking forces. Siege tactics and techniques. Medieval siege warfare represented one of the most complex and challenging forms of military operation, requiring coordination of engineering, logistics, and tactical skills that tested the capabilities of medieval military organizations. The development of systematic approaches to siege warfare demonstrated the growing sophistication of medieval military thinking and the importance of sieges in determining strategic outcomes. The initial phase of any siege involved the investment of the target, establishing control over the surrounding area to prevent relief or resupply of the defenders. This required careful planning to ensure that siege forces could be supplied while denying resources to the enemy. The establishment of siege lines, often involving the construction of temporary fortifications, demonstrated the engineering capabilities required for successful siege operations. The development of various assault techniques gave siege commanders multiple options for reducing enemy fortifications. Direct assault, while costly in casualties, could achieve rapid results if successful. The construction of siege towers provided protected platforms for attacking the tops of walls, while battering rams could breach gates and weak points in fortifications. The coordination of multiple assault techniques required sophisticated command and control systems. Mining operations represented one of the most effective methods for breaching medieval fortifications, but also one of the most technically demanding. Siege engineers had to calculate the structural effects of undermining walls while protecting their workers from defensive countermeasures. The development of countermining techniques by defenders created underground warfare that paralleled surface operations. The technical knowledge required for successful mining operations included understanding of soil conditions, structural engineering, and the use of fire and explosives to collapse undermined sections. The use of siege engines provided siege forces with the ability to damage fortifications and suppress defensive fire from a distance. The development of increasingly powerful engines, culminating in the counterweight trebuchet, enabled attackers to breach stone walls that had previously been impregnable. The technical knowledge required to construct and operate these engines effectively made siege engineers among the most valued military specialists of the medieval period. Psychological warfare played an important role in medieval siege operations. The display of overwhelming force, the systematic destruction of the surrounding countryside, and the use of terror tactics were all designed to encourage surrender without costly assault. The negotiations that often accompanied sieges involved complex considerations of honor, legal obligations, and practical military concerns. The logistical challenges of siege warfare were enormous, often exceeding those of field campaigns. Maintaining large forces in a fixed position for extended periods required sophisticated supply systems and careful planning. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453, which lasted for 7 weeks, involved extensive preparations including the stockpiling of supplies, the construction of specialized equipment, and the coordination of land and naval forces. Artillery and gunpowder weapons. The introduction of gunpowder weapons into siege warfare during the late medieval period represented a revolutionary change that rendered many traditional fortifications obsolete. The development of effective artillery required advances in metallurgy, chemistry, and engineering that pushed medieval technology to its limits. The impact of these weapons extended far beyond their immediate military effects to influence social, economic, and political structures throughout Europe. Early cannon were crude devices that offered limited advantages over traditional siege engines. The bombards of the 14th century were difficult to transport, dangerous to operate, and limited in their effectiveness against stone walls. However, their psychological impact was significant, as the noise, smoke, and destructive potential of these weapons created panic among defenders unfamiliar with gunpowder technology. The technical challenges of early artillery development were substantial. The casting of bronze and iron cannon required sophisticated foundry techniques that pushed medieval metallurgy to its limits. The development of corned gunpowder, which burned more consistently and produced greater pressure than early powder mixtures, significantly improved artillery effectiveness. The creation of standardized shot and the development of accurate aiming techniques gradually made artillery more reliable and effective. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 demonstrated the revolutionary potential of artillery when properly employed. The Great Cannon of Orban, reportedly capable of firing stone balls weighing over 600 pounds, successfully breached the Theodosian walls that had protected the city for over 1,000 years. The fall of Constantinople marked a turning point in military history and demonstrated the obsolescence of traditional medieval fortifications. The development of field artillery during the 15th century extended the impact of gunpowder weapons beyond siege warfare. Lighter cannon that could be moved with armies provided new tactical options and changed the nature of battlefield warfare. The French artillery innovations during the Italian wars demonstrated how mobile cannon could be integrated with traditional military forces to create more effective combined arms formations. The social and economic implications of artillery development were profound. The enormous cost of producing and maintaining effective artillery forces placed new financial demands on medieval governments. The specialized knowledge required to cast cannon, manufacture gunpowder, and operate artillery effectively created new categories of military specialists. The gunner emerged as a new type of professional soldier whose technical expertise was as important as traditional martial skills. The response to the artillery revolution in fortress design led to the development of the Trace Italien system during the late 15th and early 16th centuries. These new fortifications, with their low profiles, angled bastions, and sophisticated geometries, were specifically designed to resist artillery bombardment while providing effective platforms for defensive artillery. The development of this system represented a complete reconceptualization of military architecture that influenced fortress design worldwide. Defense against siege warfare. The development of effective defensive measures against siege warfare represented an ongoing challenge that drove innovation in both military engineering and tactical thinking. Medieval defenders had to counter a wide variety of siege techniques while maintaining the morale and effectiveness of their garrisons over potentially extended periods. The sophistication of defensive measures evolved continuously throughout the medieval period in response to new siege technologies and techniques. Active defense measures included the deployment of counter-siege engines to suppress enemy artillery and disrupt siege operations. Defenders developed techniques for constructing and operating mangonels, ballistas, and eventually cannon from protected positions within fortifications. The placement of defensive engines required careful consideration of fields of fire, protection from enemy counter-battery fire, and the structural capabilities of fortifications to support heavy weapons. Countermining operations represented one of the most technically demanding aspects of siege defense. Defenders had to detect enemy mining operations through acoustic means, then dig countermines to intercept enemy tunnels. The underground warfare that resulted required specialized knowledge of excavation techniques, structural engineering, and combat in confined spaces. The development of effective countermining techniques could neutralize one of the most effective siege methods available to attackers. The organization of defensive fire was crucial to the success of siege defense. Defenders had to coordinate the use of various missile weapons, including crossbows, longbows, and later firearms, to create effective fields of fire that could suppress enemy operations. The development of loopholes, embrasures, and other firing positions allowed defenders to engage attackers while remaining protected. The integration of different weapon types required training and coordination that demonstrated the professional capabilities of medieval garrisons. Passive defensive measures included the construction of obstacles and the modification of fortifications to counter specific siege techniques. The development of barbicans, additional walls and barriers outside the main fortifications, forced attackers to overcome multiple defensive lines. The creation of killing zones through careful architectural design channeled attacking forces into areas where they could be subjected to concentrated defensive fire. The maintenance of morale and supplies during extended sieges represented critical challenges for defensive commanders. The organization of food storage, water supply, and ammunition reserves required careful planning and strict discipline. The development of techniques for preserving food, managing waste, and maintaining sanitation during sieges demonstrated the administrative capabilities required for successful defense. The psychological aspects of siege defense, including the maintenance of civilian morale and the prevention of panic, required leadership skills that extended beyond purely military concerns. Communication with relief forces and the outside world was essential for successful siege defense. Defenders developed techniques for sending messages through enemy lines and coordinating with relief efforts. The use of signals, including fire beacons and flag systems, allowed defenders to communicate over distances while maintaining security. The ability to coordinate defensive efforts with external support often determined the success or failure of siege operations. The legal and diplomatic aspects of siege warfare influenced defensive strategies and outcomes. The rules governing the treatment of garrisons that surrendered after prolonged resistance, the obligations of overlords to provide relief, and the terms under which honorable surrender could be arranged all affected defensive decision-making. The development of these legal frameworks provided structure for siege warfare while limiting its destructive potential. The Mediterranean Sea served as the primary theater for naval warfare during much of the medieval period, witnessing conflicts between Byzantine, Islamic, Italian, and later Ottoman naval forces. The enclosed nature of the Mediterranean and its numerous islands and coastal cities made naval power essential for controlling trade routes and projecting military force across the region. The Byzantine Empire inherited and maintained the most sophisticated naval tradition of the early medieval period. The dromons, specialized warships designed for ramming and missile combat, formed the backbone of Byzantine naval forces. These vessels, typically powered by both oars and sails, could operate effectively in the variable wind conditions of the Mediterranean while providing platforms for the famous Greek fire weapons that gave Byzantine forces significant tactical advantages. The Arab conquest of much of the Mediterranean coastline during the 7th and 8th centuries created new naval powers that challenged Byzantine supremacy. The Umayyad and later Abbasid navies developed their own traditions of galley warfare while adapting existing technologies to their needs. The Siege of Constantinople, 717 to 718, demonstrated the importance of naval power in supporting amphibious operations and the decisive role that naval supremacy could play in determining the outcome of major campaigns. The emergence of the Italian maritime republics during the High Medieval period created new centers of naval innovation and power. Venice, Genoa, Pisa, and Amalfi developed merchant fleets that could be rapidly converted to military use, creating flexible naval forces that combined commercial and military capabilities. The rivalry between these city-states drove continuous innovation in ship design, navigation techniques, and naval tactics. The Crusades provided a major stimulus for Mediterranean naval development, as the transportation of large armies to the Holy Land required unprecedented naval capabilities. The development of specialized transport vessels, including horse transports and siege engine carriers, demonstrated the adaptability of medieval naval technology to specific military requirements. The naval battles of the crusading period, such as the Battle of Ascalon, 1123, showed how naval power could determine the success of land-based military operations. The rise of Ottoman naval power during the 15th and 16th centuries marked the final phase of medieval Mediterranean naval warfare. Ottoman galley fleets, combining traditional Mediterranean naval technology with innovations from other maritime traditions, successfully challenged Christian naval supremacy. The Battle of Preveza, 1538, demonstrated the effectiveness of Ottoman naval tactics and marked the beginning of Ottoman dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. The development of naval artillery during the late medieval period transformed Mediterranean naval warfare. The mounting of cannon on galleys created new tactical possibilities while requiring modifications to traditional ship designs. The integration of firearms with traditional naval weapons systems created more effective combined arms approaches to naval combat. Northern European naval development. Naval warfare in northern European waters developed along different lines from Mediterranean naval combat, reflecting the different environmental conditions and military traditions of the region. The rough seas and tidal conditions of the Atlantic and North Sea required different ship designs and tactical approaches from those used in the calmer waters of the Mediterranean. The Viking longship represented one of the most successful naval technologies of the early medieval period. These vessels, with their shallow draft and flexible construction, were ideally suited for both ocean voyages and river navigation. The longship's design enabled Viking forces to strike targets throughout northern Europe while maintaining the mobility that was essential to their military success. The development of the cog during the 12th and 13th centuries marked a revolutionary advance in northern European naval capabilities. These vessels, with their increased cargo capacity and improved seaworthiness, made possible larger-scale naval operations and more extended voyages. The cog's flat bottom and strong construction made it suitable for beaching operations while its high sides provided protection for crew and cargo. The Hanseatic League's naval activities demonstrated the close relationship between commerce and naval power in Northern Europe. The League's ability to maintain naval forces capable of protecting its trade routes and enforcing its commercial policies showed how merchant associations could develop effective naval capabilities. The naval conflicts between the Hanseatic League and various royal powers illustrated the importance of naval control in maintaining economic dominance. English naval development during the medieval period reflected the island nation's dependence on naval power for defense and communication with continental possessions. The development of royal naval forces, beginning with Alfred the Great's fleet reforms, created permanent naval capabilities that could respond to various threats. The naval aspects of the Norman conquest demonstrated both the importance of naval superiority and the challenges of conducting amphibious operations in northern European waters. The 100 Years' War saw significant developments in northern European naval warfare, as both English and French forces sought to control the channel and disrupt enemy communications. The Battle of Sluis, 1340, demonstrated the decisive impact that naval victory could have on broader military campaigns, while also showing how traditional naval tactics were adapted to the specific conditions of northern European waters. The development of naval artillery in northern European waters followed different patterns from Mediterranean developments. The mounting of cannon on cogs and other northern European vessel types required different technical solutions from those used on Mediterranean galleys. The integration of artillery with northern European naval traditions created distinctive tactical approaches that influenced naval development well into the early modern period. Naval tactics and ship design. Medieval naval tactics evolved significantly throughout the period, reflecting changes in ship design, weapons technology, and strategic requirements. The development from simple ramming and boarding tactics to more sophisticated combined arms approaches demonstrated the growing complexity of naval warfare and the increasing professionalization of naval forces. Early medieval naval combat was dominated by ramming and boarding tactics that emphasized the individual combat skills of warriors rather than specialized naval techniques. Viking naval combat, for example, typically involved maneuvering to favorable positions for boarding actions, with victory determined by traditional warrior skills rather than naval-specific capabilities. The longship's design facilitated this approach by providing a stable platform for hand-to-hand combat. The development of specialized warships during the High Medieval period enabled more sophisticated tactical approaches. The Byzantine dromon, with its specialized design for naval combat, could execute ramming attacks while providing platforms for missile weapons and Greek fire. The coordination of ramming attacks with missile fire required training and discipline that marked the beginning of more professional naval warfare. The emergence of galley warfare in the Mediterranean created tactical systems of considerable sophistication. Galley tactics emphasized maneuver and the concentration of force at decisive points, requiring precise coordination between multiple vessels. The development of galley formations and the standardization of signals and commands created naval tactical systems that paralleled the complexity of land-based military operations. The integration of missile weapons into naval combat changed the nature of naval tactics throughout the medieval period. The development of specialized platforms for crossbows and later firearms aboard ships enabled naval forces to engage enemies at greater distances while reducing dependence on boarding actions. The coordination of missile fire with maneuver required new tactical approaches and command systems. The mounting of artillery aboard ships during the late medieval period revolutionized naval tactics and required fundamental changes in ship design. The technical challenges of mounting cannon on ships included not only the weight and recoil issues but also the need to protect gunpowder supplies from moisture and enemy fire. The development of gun ports and the strengthening of ship structures to handle artillery represented significant engineering achievements. The development of combined arms tactics in naval warfare paralleled similar developments in land warfare. The integration of ramming, missile fire, and boarding actions into coordinated tactical systems required sophisticated command and control capabilities. The training required to execute these complex tactics effectively marked the emergence of professional naval forces that were distinct from land-based military organizations. Amphibious operations and coastal defense. Medieval amphibious warfare represented some of the most challenging military operations of the period, requiring coordination of naval and land forces under difficult conditions. The technical and logistical challenges of landing troops, equipment, and supplies on hostile shores tested the capabilities of medieval military organizations and drove innovations in both naval and military technology. The Viking raids that characterized much of the early medieval period represented a form of amphibious warfare that emphasized speed, surprise, and mobility. The longship's shallow draft enabled Viking forces to land on beaches and navigate rivers that were inaccessible to other vessels, providing tactical advantages that compensated for their relatively small numbers. The Viking ability to transition rapidly from naval to land operations made them formidable opponents throughout northern Europe. The Norman conquest of England, 1066, represented one of the most successful amphibious operations of the medieval period. The logistical planning required to transport William's army, including horses, equipment, and supplies, across the English Channel demonstrated sophisticated understanding of amphibious operations. The construction of specialized vessels and the coordination of multiple fleets showed the organizational capabilities that successful amphibious operations required. The Crusades involved numerous amphibious operations that tested the limits of medieval military capabilities. The transportation of crusading armies to the Holy Land required unprecedented naval resources and logistical coordination. The development of specialized transport vessels, including horse transports and supply ships, demonstrated how naval technology adapted to specific military requirements. The Siege of Constantinople, 1204, during the Fourth Crusade showcased innovative amphibious assault techniques. The construction of flying bridges that could be extended from ships to the city walls represented a creative solution to the challenges of amphibious assault against fortified positions. The success of this operation influenced later developments in amphibious warfare technology and tactics. Coastal defense systems evolved throughout the medieval period in response to the threat of amphibious assault. The construction of coastal fortifications, harbor defenses, and signal systems created integrated defense networks that could coordinate responses to seaborne threats. The development of harbor chains and other naval obstacles demonstrated the sophisticated engineering capabilities that coastal defense required. The development of naval bases and supply systems was essential for supporting amphibious operations and maintaining naval forces over extended periods. The construction of specialized facilities for ship maintenance, supply storage, and crew accommodation required significant investment and engineering expertise. The naval arsenals of Venice and other maritime powers represented some of the most sophisticated industrial facilities of the medieval period. Feudalism and military obligation. The feudal system that emerged in Western Europe during the early medieval period was fundamentally a military arrangement that shaped social, economic, and political structures for centuries. The relationship between land tenure and military service created a social hierarchy based on military obligation that influenced all aspects of medieval society. Understanding feudalism is essential for comprehending the broader impact of warfare on medieval civilization. The basic principle of feudalism involved the granting of land, fief, in exchange for military service. This created a pyramid of obligation extending from the king down to individual knights, with each level of the hierarchy owing specific military duties to those above. The fief provided the economic resources necessary to maintain the military equipment and training required for effective service, while the military obligation ensured that the grantor could call upon military support when needed. The military obligations of feudal service were carefully defined and varied according to the size and value of the fief granted. A typical knight's fee might require 40 days of military service per year, though the specific terms varied considerably across different regions and time periods. These obligations included not only personal service but also the maintenance of appropriate equipment and the provision of additional troops in proportion to the land held. The economic implications of the feudal military system were profound. The cost of maintaining a knight in equipment and training was substantial, requiring the agricultural surplus from significant amounts of land. The development of heavy cavalry as the dominant military force was thus directly linked to the agricultural productivity and economic organization of medieval society. The concentration of land ownership among the military elite created economic inequalities that persisted throughout the medieval period. The social stratification created by feudalism extended far beyond the military elite to encompass all levels of society. Peasants who worked the land were bound to their lords not only by economic necessity but also by legal obligations that included military service in local defense forces. The development of serfdom was closely linked to the need for stable agricultural labor to support the military superstructure of feudal society. The fragmentation of political authority that characterized feudalism created both opportunities and challenges for military organization. Local lords could respond rapidly to immediate threats and maintain detailed knowledge of local conditions, but coordinating larger military operations across feudal boundaries proved difficult. The transition to new forms of military organization marked broader social and economic changes that characterized the end of the medieval period. The economics of medieval warfare. Medieval warfare placed enormous economic demands on societies that were primarily agricultural and had limited monetary systems. The cost of maintaining military forces, constructing fortifications, and conducting campaigns required mobilization of economic resources that often strained medieval economies to their limits. Understanding the economic aspects of medieval warfare is essential for comprehending both military capabilities and their broader social impact. The direct costs of medieval warfare included the maintenance of military equipment, the payment of soldiers, and the supply of armies in the field. The equipment required for heavy cavalry, including horse, armor, and weapons, represented a substantial investment that was beyond the reach of most individuals. The development of the feudal system was partly a response to these economic realities, creating mechanisms for distributing military costs across society through land-based obligations. The logistical challenges of medieval warfare created additional economic burdens that often exceeded the direct costs of military operations. Supplying armies in the field required extensive transportation systems, storage facilities, and administrative organizations that demanded significant resources. The development of military supply systems contributed to broader economic development through improvements in transportation and commercial organization. The destruction caused by medieval warfare had devastating effects on agricultural production and economic development. The systematic devastation employed in campaigns such as the English chevauchés in France during the Hundred Years' War deliberately targeted economic infrastructure to weaken enemy capacity for resistance. The recovery from such devastation often required decades and represented one of the most significant costs of medieval warfare. The development of fortifications represented massive capital investments that demonstrated both the importance of defense and the economic capabilities of medieval societies. The construction of major castles or city walls required enormous quantities of materials and skilled labor over extended periods. The economic impact of these construction projects extended beyond their immediate military purpose to influence local economies and technological development. The emergence of mercenary forces during the later medieval period reflected the growing monetization of European economies and the limitations of traditional feudal military obligations. Professional soldiers commanded substantial wages, while mercenary companies required payment for equipment and supplies. The economic burden of mercenary forces often exceeded that of traditional feudal armies but provided military capabilities that were otherwise unavailable. The financing of medieval warfare drove innovations in taxation, banking, and government administration that had lasting effects on European development. The need to raise funds for military operations led to the development of new forms of taxation and the creation of more sophisticated administrative systems. The military demands of rulers such as Edward III of England during the Hundred Years' War contributed to the development of parliamentary institutions and representative government. Social mobility and military service. Military service provided one of the primary avenues for social advancement in medieval society, though the opportunities and limitations varied significantly across different periods and regions. The warrior culture that dominated medieval society created possibilities for talented individuals to improve their social status through military achievement, while also establishing barriers that prevented broader social mobility. The early medieval period saw considerable opportunities for social advancement through military service. The disruption of established social hierarchies following the collapse of Roman authority created conditions where military leaders could establish new power bases and achieve noble status. The emergence of new royal dynasties and aristocratic families often had military origins, demonstrating the potential for dramatic social advancement through martial success. The consolidation of feudal society during the High Medieval period created more rigid social hierarchies that limited opportunities for advancement through military service. The hereditary nature of feudal obligations and the enormous costs associated with knightly equipment made entry into the warrior elite increasingly difficult for those not born to it. However, military service continued to provide opportunities for advancement within existing social ranks. The development of professional military service during the later medieval period created new categories of social advancement based on military skills rather than birth or land ownership. Professional soldiers, military engineers, and artillery specialists could achieve significant status and wealth through their expertise. The emergence of military professionals who served multiple employers created a form of international military culture that transcended traditional social boundaries. The military orders provided alternative paths for social advancement that combined military service with religious vocation. The Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and other military orders recruited from various social backgrounds and provided opportunities for advancement based on merit and devotion. The wealth and power achieved by these orders demonstrated the potential for religious military institutions to create new forms of social organization. The impact of military service on women's social status was complex and varied considerably across different contexts. While women were generally excluded from direct military participation, their roles in defending castles, managing estates during men's absence, and supporting military operations provided opportunities for exercising authority and influence. The development of chivalric culture also created new ideals of feminine honor and status that were closely linked to military values. The emergence of citizen militias in medieval cities created opportunities for social advancement based on civic rather than feudal military service. The military obligations of urban citizenship provided paths for social mobility that were distinct from traditional aristocratic military service. The success of citizen soldiers in conflicts such as the battles of the Swiss Confederacy demonstrated alternative models of military organization and social advancement. Urban warfare and city defense. The growth of cities during the medieval period created new challenges for both military attackers and defenders while fundamentally altering the nature of warfare in many regions. Urban warfare required different tactical approaches, specialized equipment, and unique organizational capabilities that distinguished it from rural military operations. The development of city defenses represented some of the most sophisticated military engineering achievements of the medieval period. Medieval cities presented both opportunities and challenges for military forces. The concentration of population, wealth, and resources made cities attractive targets for conquest, while their defensive walls and organized populations made them formidable obstacles to attackers. The economic importance of cities meant that control over urban centers often determined the outcome of broader political and military conflicts. The development of city walls and fortifications represented massive community investments that demonstrated both the importance of urban defense and the economic capabilities of medieval cities. The construction and maintenance of defensive walls required coordination between civic authorities, military engineers, and the general population. The evolution of urban fortification design reflected changing military technologies and the growing sophistication of siege warfare. The organization of urban defense required coordination between professional military forces and citizen militias that created unique command and control challenges. Cities had to balance the military expertise of professional soldiers with the local knowledge and motivation of citizen defenders. The development of civic military institutions provided models for military organization that influenced broader developments in medieval warfare. The siege of medieval cities often involved complex interactions between military, economic, and political factors. Besieging forces had to maintain control over surrounding territory while preventing supplies from reaching the defenders. The economic impact of sieges extended far beyond the immediate combatants to affect trade networks and regional stability. The diplomatic negotiations that often accompanied sieges demonstrated the political complexity of urban warfare. Urban warfare required specialized tactical approaches that differed significantly from rural military operations. Fighting in the confined spaces of city streets required different weapons and formations than battlefield combat. The development of urban combat techniques influenced military training and equipment throughout the medieval period. The unique challenges of urban warfare contributed to innovations in military technology and tactics. The defense of cities during the later medieval period had to adapt to the challenge of artillery and other gunpowder weapons. The modification of existing fortifications and the development of new defensive systems designed to resist cannon fire represented significant engineering achievements. The Tres Italienne fortification system that emerged during this period was specifically designed for urban defense in the age of gunpowder warfare. The church and military culture. The relationship between Christianity and warfare in medieval Europe was complex and evolved significantly throughout the period. The Church's influence on military culture extended from theological justifications for warfare to practical involvement in military operations and the development of military institutions. Understanding this relationship is essential for comprehending the broader cultural context of medieval warfare. The concept of just war, developed by early Christian theologians such as Augustine and later refined by Thomas Aquinas, provided theological framework for justifying military action within Christian moral teaching. These theories established criteria for when warfare could be considered morally acceptable and governed the conduct of military operations. The development of just war theory influenced medieval military culture and provided intellectual foundation for many military conflicts. The Crusades represented the most dramatic expression of the relationship between Christianity and warfare during the medieval period. The concept of holy war, while not entirely new, reached unprecedented development during the crusading movement. The religious motivation provided by crusading ideology enabled the mobilization of resources and manpower for military operations on an unprecedented scale while creating new forms of military organization and culture. The military orders that emerged during the crusading period represented a unique fusion of religious devotion and military professionalism. Orders such as the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and Teutonic Knights combined monastic vows with military service, creating institutions that were both religious communities and professional military organizations. The wealth and power achieved by these orders demonstrated the potential for religious institutions to become major military forces. The Church's role in medieval warfare extended beyond ideological justification to practical involvement in military operations. Bishops and abbots often served as military commanders, while ecclesiastical institutions provided financial support for military campaigns. The wealth of the Church made it a crucial source of funding for military operations, while its international organization provided networks for coordination and communication. The development of chivalric culture during the High Medieval period was heavily influenced by Christian ideals and values. The code of chivalry combined martial virtues with Christian moral teachings, creating a warrior ethic that emphasized service to God and protection of the weak. The literary tradition that celebrated chivalric ideals contributed to the development of European cultural identity and military values. The Church's influence on the conduct of warfare included attempts to limit military violence through institutions such as the Peace of God and Truce of God movements. These initiatives sought to protect non-combatants, limit fighting to certain times and places, and establish rules for military conduct. While the effectiveness of these measures was limited, they represented important attempts to impose moral constraints on medieval warfare. The medieval period established technological and organizational foundations that continued to influence military development long after the end of the Middle Ages. Many innovations that are associated with early modern or even modern warfare had their origins in medieval military necessity and experimentation. Understanding these connections reveals the continuity of military development and the lasting impact of medieval military culture. The metallurgical advances developed during the medieval period provided the foundation for later developments in firearms and artillery technology. The techniques for working iron and steel, the understanding of alloy composition, and the development of sophisticated metalworking tools all contributed to the later development of effective firearms. The expertise developed by medieval armorers and weaponsmiths was essential for the production of early guns and cannon. The organizational innovations of medieval warfare, including the development of professional military hierarchies, systematic training programs, and sophisticated logistical systems, influenced military development well into the modern era. The administrative techniques developed to support medieval armies provided models for later military organization. The concept of military professionalism that emerged during the later medieval period established precedents that continued to influence military culture. The fortification systems developed during the medieval period, particularly the Tres Italien designs of the late medieval period, continued to influence military architecture for centuries. The principles of defensive design established during the medieval period, including the importance of interlocking fields of fire and the integration of active and passive defensive systems, remained relevant throughout the gunpowder age. The tactical innovations of medieval warfare provided foundations for later military development. The combined arms approaches developed during the medieval period, integrating cavalry, infantry, and missile weapons, established principles that continued to influence military tactics. The lessons learned about coordination, command and control, and battlefield communication during medieval conflicts contributed to later developments in military science. The naval technologies and techniques developed during the medieval period influenced maritime warfare for centuries. The ship design innovations, navigation techniques, and naval organizational systems established during the medieval period provided foundations for the age of exploration and the development of global naval power. The integration of artillery with naval warfare that began during the late medieval period continued to influence naval development. Political and social transformations. Medieval warfare played a crucial role in shaping the political and social structures that emerged from the Middle Ages and continued to influence European development well into the modern era. The military innovations and organizational changes that occurred during the medieval period had profound effects on government, society, and culture that extended far beyond their immediate military applications. The development of professional armies during the later medieval period contributed to the emergence of more centralized political authority and the decline of feudal decentralization. The ability of rulers to maintain permanent military forces independent of feudal obligations enabled the development of stronger royal authority and the emergence of early modern state systems. The administrative capabilities required to support professional armies contributed to broader developments in government organization and bureaucratic efficiency. The economic demands of medieval warfare drove innovations in taxation, finance, and administration that had lasting effects on European political development. The need to raise funds for military operations led to the development of more sophisticated fiscal systems and contributed to the emergence of representative institutions. The relationship between military necessity and political innovation established patterns that continued to influence European development. The social changes brought about by medieval warfare, including the emergence of new forms of social mobility and the development of professional military classes, contributed to broader transformations in European society. The decline of traditional feudal hierarchies and the emergence of new social groups based on professional military service established precedents for later social development. The cultural impact of medieval warfare, including the development of chivalric ideals and military literature, influenced European culture for centuries. The values and traditions established during the medieval period continued to influence military culture and broader social attitudes toward warfare, honor, and service. The literary and artistic traditions that emerged from medieval military culture provided models that influenced later cultural development. The legal and institutional innovations developed to regulate medieval warfare contributed to the emergence of international law and diplomatic systems. The rules governing the conduct of warfare, the treatment of prisoners, and the rights of non-combatants that were developed during the medieval period provided foundations for later developments in international relations. Lessons for military history. The study of medieval warfare provides important insights into the nature of military innovation, the relationship between technology and tactics, and the broader social and political impacts of military development. These lessons continue to be relevant for understanding military history and the role of warfare in human societies. The medieval period demonstrates the importance of organizational innovation alongside technological development. Many of the most significant military advances of the period resulted from improvements in military organization, training, and logistics rather than purely technological innovation. The success of military forces often depended more on their ability to coordinate different capabilities effectively than on the possession of advanced equipment. The complex relationship between military innovation and social change during the medieval period illustrates how military developments can both reflect and drive broader social transformations. Military innovation often occurred in response to social and economic changes, while military success could enable further social and political transformation. Understanding these relationships is essential for comprehending the broader impact of warfare on human societies. The medieval period also demonstrates the importance of cultural and ideological factors in military effectiveness. The religious motivations that drove the Crusades, the chivalric ideals that influenced knightly behavior, and the civic pride that motivated urban militias all show how non-material factors could be decisive in military conflicts. The integration of cultural values with military organization provided sources of motivation and cohesion that were often more important than material advantages. The study of medieval warfare reveals the continuous nature of military innovation and the importance of adaptation in military success. Military systems that failed to adapt to changing conditions quickly became obsolete, while those that successfully integrated new technologies and techniques with existing capabilities achieved lasting success. The ability to learn from military experience and adapt to new challenges was often more important than initial technological or organizational advantages. The global nature of military innovation during the medieval period, including the exchange of technologies and techniques across cultural boundaries, demonstrates the importance of cross-cultural contact in military development. Many of the most significant military innovations of the period resulted from the adaptation of technologies and techniques from different military traditions. The study of these exchanges provides insights into the processes by which military innovation occurs and spreads. The medieval military heritage. The legacy of medieval warfare extends far beyond its immediate historical period to influence military thinking, political development, and cultural values that continue to shape the modern world. Understanding this heritage provides perspective on both historical development and contemporary challenges in military and political affairs. The institutional innovations of medieval warfare, including the development of professional military organizations, systematic training programs, and sophisticated logistical systems, provided models that continue to influence military organization. The principles of military professionalism, the importance of combined arms coordination, and the necessity of effective logistics all have their origins in medieval military development. The technological innovations of medieval warfare established foundations for later military development that continued to be relevant well into the modern era. The metallurgical advances, engineering techniques, and mechanical innovations developed during the medieval period contributed to later developments in military technology. The experimental approach to military innovation that characterized the medieval period established patterns of technological development that continue to influence military research and development. The political and social impacts of medieval warfare established precedents for the relationship between military power and political authority that continue to influence contemporary political development. The emergence of professional armies, the development of more centralized political authority, and the creation of more sophisticated administrative systems all had their origins in medieval military necessity. The cultural legacy of medieval warfare, including the development of military ethics, the tradition of military literature, and the values associated with military service, continues to influence contemporary military culture. The ideals of service, honor, and duty that were developed during the medieval period, while modified by changing circumstances, continue to provide foundations for military professionalism and civic virtue. The study of medieval warfare provides important lessons for understanding the nature of military innovation, the relationship between military power and political authority, and the broader social and cultural impacts of warfare. These lessons remain relevant for contemporary military and political challenges and provide historical perspective on the enduring questions of warfare, technology, and society. The medieval period represents a crucial phase in the development of military technology, organization, and culture that established foundations for later military development. The innovations and traditions established during this period continued to influence warfare long after the end of the Middle Ages and provide important insights into the nature of military development and its broader social and political impacts. Understanding medieval warfare is essential for comprehending both the historical development of military affairs and the continuing influence of medieval innovations on contemporary military thinking and organization. The transformation of warfare during the medieval period from the organized legions of Rome to the professional armies of the Renaissance represents one of the most significant periods of military development in human history. The technologies, tactics, and institutions developed during this period provided foundations for later military development that continue to influence warfare today. The study of medieval warfare thus provides not only historical knowledge but also insights into the continuing evolution of military affairs and the enduring relationship between warfare and human society.